Thank you, first of all, for inviting me back. I so enjoyed the last event, the Peace One Day event. It was amazing, and the feedback was incredible. I want to say, first of all, why I'm here. I mean, I'm here because I met Jeremy at a red carpet event, and he was so interesting and humble. And then when he started talking about what he did, I was just totally inspired. And then we got to know each other closely, and I've got to say, it's a real privilege to be here. And in order to give you a bit more background to myself, I'll introduce myself, even though that was a beautiful introduction from Steve and undeserved. But I'll give you a bit more of an introduction to myself. I'm BJ Cunningham. I'm an entrepreneur. I've never had a job. My career started completely by accident. After university, I went traveling. I ended up in Los Angeles, and I used the last of my money to buy a beautiful old car, a Karmann Ghia convertible. And when I brought it back, the guy at customs at Felixstowe, who fills out all of the paperwork, offered me double what I'd paid for the car, and so I sold it to him. I took the money, I went back to LA, I bought 2 cars, I brought them back, I sold them, I doubled my money, went back and bought 4, and this continued over a 2-3-year period, and it was like going into a casino and knowing that every time the wheel span, it was going to come up black, and every time it came up black, and I just kept doubling my money and doubling my money and doubling my money, and I thought I was the bollocks, you know, just the golden one, that nothing could go wrong, and that this was life, and it was easy, and I couldn't understand why my mates were complaining about their jobs, and I ended up with a beautiful, beautiful house in Knightsbridge and a gorgeous girlfriend and a fantastic dog, and I was cruising. What I didn't understand about the market I was operating in at the time was it was a complete illusion. It was based upon a then capital gains loophole, whereby if you bought any vehicle that was over 20 years old and you sold it, you didn't have to pay capital gains on the money you made when you sold it. So everyone was piling into the classic sports car market, and the bubble was going bigger and bigger and bigger. And I happily sat on the outside of that bubble, on the edge of that bubble, believing that 2.5 million was good value for a Ferrari, and just sat there watching this whole thing grow and grow and grow. And there were even hedge funds at the time that were buying classic cars and then putting them in garages and wrapping them in plastic and having dehumidifiers and just waiting for the capital value to grow. The market collapsed when the Chancellor changed the legislation. And when the market collapsed, it collapsed abruptly, it collapsed radically, and everything just fell out of bed. And when that happened, I had 8 containers of Ferraris up the Panama Canal. And the Panama Canal then closed, coincidentally, for political reasons. So I was up this really big creek with absolutely no kind of paddle, and I lost everything. Within a 3-month period, I went from this life of just this beautiful life to I lost the house, I lost the girlfriend, I kept the dog, and I ended up with a personal overdraft of £876,000. And I did the one thing I could think of doing at the time, which was to call my father, who is a deeply lovely and generous man. He's a professional man. He's always looked after us. And I remember calling him and saying, you know, Dad, I got this problem. And he said, you know, no problem, BJ, I'm sure we can help. And what's the damage? And I said, well, Dad, it's 876,000. And there was this silence on the phone. And then he said, you're on your own, you know. I'm sure you'll learn a valuable lesson. And I did. I learned my first proper business lesson, which is if you owe the bank 5 grand, you're a bad debt. If you owe the bank 876,000, you're a good customer. And all of a sudden, I was a good customer with the bank, and the bank manager took me into a room and started serving me lovely coffee and talked about our problem and how were we going to solve this problem. And I loved that we, and I realized I was in a position of leverage, and I did a deal with the bank. And I said, if you'll lend me a further 250 and write my debt down to 250, I'll pay you back the 500 over a 3-year period. And the bank manager said yes, with various caveats. And I was away on my next adventure, which I'm going to share with you just briefly as I go through the journey here. And that adventure led to me, after 7 years, becoming an expert in provocative brand marketing and brand creation. That was the tag. And I decided to leverage this newfound position of expertise and start an advertising agency, and took out 3,500 square foot of space in Old Street and hired my cousin, who was unemployed at the time, and pretty soon realized I needed clients. And the way you get clients is by being a genuine expert. And the way you become a genuine expert is by writing a book. And so I wrote a book, and I bought 5,000 copies of the book to send out in hardback to the CEOs and the marketing directors of the companies I wanted to become my clients. And as a result of buying 5,000 copies, the book became an international business bestseller. And then I was a genuine expert. And incidentally, I don't recommend the book. It's not a particularly good book. In fact, no one even read the book. On page 168 of the book, I'd laced into the text, if you've got this far, you've done really well, give me a call and I'll send you a bottle of whiskey, because I thought that would generate inbound calls, and no one called. Okay, so I know no one read it. But there were some ideas in it which were very useful, and I'll come back and share those ideas with you during this presentation. And in terms of this presentation, I've called it What It Means to Differentiate and Why It Matters, and I've subtitled it Life, Death, and Nothing. That will become apparent again as we go through it. And it revolves really the story around a mantra that I hold true and that's guided me in my life, and that mantra is this: wherever there is a hidden agenda or an outright lie, in my view, there's the potential for profit. So again, this is not a new idea. I'm a great believer that there is nothing new. We are just reminded consistently of things we already know. This is the American Indians said, the antidote is in the venom. Frank Lloyd Wright said, a building should be of the hill, not on the hill. I say, wherever there is a problem, wherever there's a nightmare, wherever there's a taboo that you just really don't want to deal with, at the heart of that problem is a solution bursting to come out. So a really good way of looking at life is this. If in your life or in your business you have many, many problems, you are truly blessed, because this is the universe just giving you, it's angels kissing you with problems, because problems are opportunities to change. So for me, a problem is an opportunity to change. And in the world of tobacco, which was the world I started looking at, there was a taboo at the heart of that industry, a nightmare that nobody wanted to deal with. And that nightmare was this: cigarettes are the only legally available consumer product which kill people when used exactly as intended. So I was interested in this world. I was interested in these major companies that were out there. And I was interested that in that industry, there was nobody who was actually confronting this issue. There was a big problem that nobody was looking at. So I looked at that, and I saw an opportunity in that for a new brand with a unique promise, the truth. And I created this brand of cigarettes called Death, with the universal symbol of poison and disease as the logo. Of course, we also had slow death. You know, it's very important to have choice in these matters. And we had the cigarette, on every cigarette stick, a skull and crossbones. And we couldn't get the Queen's warrant, so we created our own, which was a skull and crossbones on top of a burning funeral pyre where the flames looked vaguely like a lion and a unicorn, and underneath was a scroll, and in it said, "Our cause is just, we must prevail." And I was so excited by this idea of a cigarette that told the truth, that let people, that really wasn't hiding anywhere, that took the moral high ground in a debate that was really a morally laden debate. And so I started looking at this, and at this stage I've got to say again, God bless Barclays Bank, because this is the idea I went to them with, where they did the deal with me. And one of the caveats they had was, BJ, we'll back you as long as you can find somebody to manufacture this for you. And I thought that would be a no-brainer. And then I went to see Gallagher, the largest tobacco company in the UK, and saw the new brand development director at Gallagher, and I said to him, Death cigarettes, these are so cool, and I put them on his pack, and the truth, and people will love them. And he just picked up the phone, security? They physically threw me to the ground outside their offices. And then it took me 6 months, and I just want to stress how long 6 months is when you're 876 grand overdrawn. It is an eternity. And that taught me another lesson. Be careful what you wish for, because the universe will deliver. If you are dogged and you are willing to go down the road and face the trials that she throws up, the universe will wash you up on the beach of your own choosing. I ended up, after 6 months in Amsterdam, in a coffee shop, enjoying a cappuccino, sitting opposite this lovely bloke, and we were having a great chat. And eventually, the conversation got round to, what do you do? And he started telling me about his story, and he had just inherited his cigarette factory from his father. And at the same time, he'd found religion, and he was having a hard time reconciling these newfound religious beliefs with the manufacture of cigarettes. So I offered him the opportunity to profit from the truth with death cigarettes, and he said, amen. And the next thing, I had my one-bedroom flat down in Lewisham, because I'd now moved from Knightsbridge down to Lewisham. And I apologise to anybody here who's from Lewisham, but it really is the arse end of London. And I was in this one-bedroom flat surrounded by fags, and I thought I'd made it. But in fact, it was the beginning of a vertical learning curve. The one great thing about not knowing what you're doing is that you don't know you can't. I was effectively building my parachute as I fell, and galvanizing, watching things and being pitched by people and looking at ideas and seeing how it works, and essentially trying to establish Death Cigarettes as a brand. And I'm going to come back and talk about the learnings I got from that in a minute. But what I was really doing was juxtapositioning against everybody else in that industry. So against the no comment from the tobacco industry around cigarettes, I sang a eulogy to tobacco. Because I've smoked since I was 13 years old. I love fags. I love putting a cigarette to my lips and lighting it and inhaling and feeling the warmth of that air in my lungs and the nicotine ripping into my bloodstream and knowing I'm going to have another in 10 minutes. I love fags. You know, they deliver every time. But the problem is, you're going to die, and you're going to die horribly. And if you're cool with that, you're a smoker. And if you're not cool with that and you smoke, then think carefully about what it is that you're doing. So against the no proof that smoking damages health, I said very simply, no, smoking kills. In fact, we offered a money-back guarantee on exactly that point. Against the sophisticated brand names in the market, we called our brand Death. While they were trying to camouflage the health warning with their design and marketing, we were becoming the health warning. So against their cowboys and colours, we were offering a black and white symbol in a black and white packet with a black and white message, essentially the universal symbol of poison and disease, death. So we were saying cigarette smoking is not like hanging around in the Grand Canyon rounding up cattle. It is not like having a moustache driving a jeep through the jungle fighting crocodiles, or being a Formula One racing car driver, or abseiling down a mountain with a beautiful girl. It is very simple. Cigarette smoking is like this. You will have a sublime hit of gorgeous nicotine through your radically shortened life, and then you will die, and you will die horribly. And as I say, if you're cool with that, you're a smoker, and if you're not, think carefully. And this comes back to a very simple idea, which is responsibility. Furnish people with the information with which to make a decision, and then honor the decision that they make as adults in a free society. Don't tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. So in this industry, there were two sides that have been set up in this debate. And those sides have been set up by the tobacco companies themselves, who by uttering no comment while facing this big problem and not addressing the problem and sticking their heads in the sand and having their arse in the air, invited a fierce kicking from the emergence of a new group of liberty snatchers, the anti-smoking lobby. So on the one side, you've got these Puritan fundamentalists who are desperately telling everybody what they should or shouldn't be doing. And on the other side, these heroes who even in a hurricane will be out there with the rain coming sideways and smoking their fags. And then most people in the middle who don't really care either way. You know, if you want to smoke and kill yourself, go ahead. If don't tell me what I should or shouldn't be doing. So there's a big debate. And in all of that debate, the position that was missing was the champion of the consumer. And I think wherever in business you can champion the consumer, you can make an enormous change. We reinforced all of our activity with our sponsorship. So for example, we paid for the life-saving heart bypass operation of a guy from Hull who was being refused treatment by the National Health Service because he was a smoker, which in my view is an outrage because he paid a premium for that service through all the taxes he'd been paying on his fags. We brought him under blue light to London. He had a quadruple heart bypass. The next day there was a big press conference. The press were angry. The first question came from the Daily Mirror. Mr. Cunningham, are you not just cynically exploiting this man's life in order to promote your brand of cigarettes? And the answer was, yes. You know, that is exactly what we're doing. Don't you think it'd be more cynical to let this guy die? And then across the world, Death Saves Life, Dr. Death in life-saving heart bypass operation. We had a phenomenal amount of coverage as a result of that, and also we saved a guy's life. Another example, we sponsored the Gay Pride Festival in London as the Honest Fag. Because Gay Pride is all about being an honest fag, and we're all about selling honest fags, and we brought out Pink Death for the day, and I got snogged by Lily Savage, who's a great kisser. You know, it was a fantastic event. And again, exactly the same issue. Whose business is it how two adults in our society choose to love each other? Whose business is it but their own? We ought to spend a lot more time taking the planks out of our own eyes rather than looking at the specks in everybody else's. Mind your own business and don't be in judgment on everybody else. So we had evangelical smokers, but we had no distribution. And the reason we had no distribution was because the major tobacco companies didn't want to see a cigarette on the shelf next to their product called Death, because they felt it was antithetical to their interests, and they own the shelf. And I learned another important business lesson. It doesn't matter how much people want your product. If it's not on the shelf for sale, they can't buy it. And every time our reps went and put the cigarettes up on the shelf, their army of reps would come and take them down. And we were in trouble. It's a volume business. We were losing 0.02 pence a packet. And I was really watching this company wind up. By now we had 207 employees, 3 factories on the Dutch-German border, and it was a difficult situation. And at this stage, I heard about a guy from Newcastle upon Tyne who had convinced a local magistrates court that the 7.5 tons of 7.5 tons of alcohol that he'd brought into the UK was for his personal consumption. And as a result, UK tax and duty wasn't payable because he'd already paid it once in France. So I started looking at European law, I started looking at the tax differentials between member states, and I came up with a scheme for price arbitrage that I put to my board with one simple slide. I said, guys, I want to create an idea called Tobacco Direct, whereby we can offer consumers a 40% discount on price, while we make a 25% net profit margin being paid in advance with no bad debt. Now, my board were naturally interested, and they wanted to hear what this idea was. I knew that a principle of law, Roman law, that underpins UK law and European law, is que facit per alium facit per se. Now, what that bit of Latin means is, if you appoint somebody to act as agent on your behalf, in the eyes of the law, they are you. It's a cornerstone of law. It means you can't get round the law by way of a third party. If you say to somebody, go and rob a bank, and they go and rob a bank, and they get caught robbing the bank, it's as if you were robbing the bank yourself. So I said, what would happen if I set up a company to act as agent for UK smokers purchasing cigarettes on their behalf in another member state of Europe, then again, as their agent, arrange for the transport of those cigarettes via DHL to their home address in the UK for their personal consumption? Where would the tax be payable? 70 grand later, senior tax counsel in the UK tells me the tax will be payable at the point of purchase for consumption, which I chose to be Luxembourg, because that's where the European Court of Justice is, and I knew that's where we'd end up. So we kicked off with this scheme, and we put it out with a flyer that said, the Grim Reaper don't come cheaper, and it started to go very well. By month 6, well, in the first week, we were getting 2 or 3 envelopes per day. By month 2, we were getting 4 or 5 sacks of envelopes a day. By month 6, we were clearing in excess of £900,000 net profit a week. It was such a laugh. We became DHL's largest customer in Europe. We were flying 2 aircraft full of cigarettes into Stansted every week, because I knew that if you could do it with Death cigarettes, you could do it with any brand of cigarettes. So we did it with every brand of cigarettes, and we sold Benelux out of Benson and Hedges, Camel Lights, Marlboro. God, it was a laugh. And then there was a knock at the door, and it was after 6 months, and it was Her Majesty's Customs and Excise. And I said, boys, come in, you're late. And they all came in, and we sat round the boardroom table, and I gave them all a fag, because they all smoke, and gave them all a cup of tea, and they were really polite, you know, having a night. And then eventually, Mr. Cunningham, we'd better get down to business. Are there any cigarettes on this premises which have not had UK tax and duty paid? And I said, yes, you're all smoking them. And they all put out their fags. And then they took everything. They took the computers. I said, you're acting illegally. I'm a good European citizen. They said, no, you're nothing more than a common bootlegger. I was thrilled. And then this went to judicial review. The judicial review judge passed it on to the High Court. The 3 High Court judges moved it on to the Court of Appeal. In the Court of Appeal, Her Majesty's Customs and Excise were joined by the 2 largest tobacco companies in the UK, Imperial and Gallagher. The appeal court moved it onto the House of Lords, and then the House of Lords moved it onto the European Court of Justice, where Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, Imperial and Gallagher were joined by every other member state of Europe, except for Spain and Portugal, who are on my team. So it was me, Spain and Portugal against every other member state in this beautiful building. And in the European Court, you don't have 1 judge or 3 judges, you have 10 judges, and they all wear pink, and they've got these long pink globes. And the reason we were there, of course, was we were then threatening a £14.5 billion revenue stream to the Exchequer. And essentially, governments don't like to tax compete. They like to be in control of their farm and to farm us for the taxes themselves. And what this was doing was allowing consumers the opportunity to choose where the tax was lowest, effectively using market forces to harmonise taxes. And that wasn't a welcome idea. So in the European Court, in front of these 10 judges, all dressed in pink with their soft fez hats sitting behind a crescent-shaped table, eventually they heard the whole thing and all the drama was going on with all the lawyers. And then it came back and the lead judge, who was a French judge, came back with his answer, and his answer was no. And then he gave his reasoning, and I quote, because it cost me 1.6 million to hear this, so I learnt it off by heart. Mr. Cunningham, you are right in law, but the law was never intended for you to be right, and therefore you are wrong. I promise. It was unbelievable. And that, you know, you come out of the European Court and you go through and there are all the TV cameras and what do you make of this ruling? And it was a massive political ruling and I was furious. And essentially we had to then look at closing down all of those areas of the business and really re-studying everything. And I went back to the drawing board and I was now obsessed with tax. And I just want to share with you, how cigarettes are taxed in order to understand. And incidentally, it's worth stating this. The tobacco business is a volume game where the government make all the money. 86% of the selling price on a packet of cigarettes is tax. In my view, the guy who's taking 86% of the revenue is the guy who's selling the product. Tobacco companies are just glamorous tax collectors. It is the government that's selling cigarettes. It's the government who's taking all the revenue. And they take it by way of two taxes. One is an ad valorem tax, which is a percentage of the recommended retail price, so there's nothing you can do about it, because if you put your price up or down, the percentage just swings with it. The key tax, the critical tax, is called a specific tax, which is a tax per specific cigarette stick. So I went and looked at what is the legal definition of a cigarette stick. As defined by European Directive number 32, dated 1979, a cigarette stick is defined as cut tobacco, rolled in paper, capable for immediate use for smoking, not exceeding 9 centimeters in total length of tobacco roll, excluding filter or mouthpiece. In other words, you can't have one enormous fag, okay, because every 9 centimeters they're going to tax you like it's another fag. But what they don't say is where the filter has to be. So I put the filter in the middle, I perforated it, that way you could break it in half and you get 2 fags for the price of 1. And I was so excited by this idea, and I patented the idea and I set up the factories and we were ready to go, and I had Booker and Palmer and Harvey, the 2 largest independent tobacco distributors in the UK, ready on minimum orders. And the cigarettes were manufactured and the containers were going. And then I got a call through from Sir Robert Henderson, who's the principal of Her Majesty's Customs Division A, based up in Salford in Manchester, who I got to know very well as a result of these court cases. And he said, "Oh, Cunningham, why don't you just get a job?" And I said, "Bobby, this is my job." He said, "We can't have these 2 for 1." I said, "I'm sorry, they're coming." So we were back in court. And the court case was this. What is a half plus a half? Okay, I knew I'd lose because I'd been through this whole palaver before. So I represented myself. When it came to my turn, I had an apple, a tray, and a knife. I said to the judge, "How many apples do I have on my tray?" He said, "You have 1 apple." I then took the knife and I cut the apple in half. I said, "Now how many apples do I have on my tray?" And he said, "I will not have this theatrics in my courtroom." And he threw me out. And you won't be surprised to hear that for tax purposes in the UK in regards to tobacco products, a half plus a half equals 2. Okay, it's a miracle. Again, everything, even the laws of mathematics are subject to radical and immediate change. So I say this, build flexibility into your businesses. Build into the DNA of your thinking the opportunity to shift. Put many legs on your businesses so that if one goes down, you can still run on. Everything changes all the time. So I was back to the drawing board. How do I encourage distribution? The answer is increase the margin to the retailer. How do you increase the margin to the retailer? The answer is increase the price to the consumer. How do you justify the increase in price to the consumer? Add content. I added guarana to my cigarettes. This is an energy-giving substance from the Amazon, and they started to go very well, and in this way I was able to sell 10 for the price of 20. This is the opposite of the tobacco business. This is low volume, high margin, and it started to go well, and at this stage I got a call from my Russian distributor who I mean, I always stutter here because there's a very polite way of describing him. He is a gangster. And he said, "I like your cigarettes. Have you got anything better?" I said, "What do you mean by better?" He said, "More expensive." And I said, "Yes, of course." Went back to the drawing board. "Guys, we've got to come up with something really expensive for the Russians." So we did. We came up with the world's most expensive cigarettes, 20 quid a packet, aluminium packaging, silver tip, watermark paper, absolutely gorgeous. Why 20 quid? big number. You know, I just wanted a big, big number. I wanted them to be the world's most expensive. I wanted that market position. And again, it started to go very, very well. And then we launched them in duty-free in Singapore. And at duty-free, we said for first-class passengers only. Where the price point was $23, $18, I just said too expensive. And so people were, no, it's not too expensive for me. You know, they're coming along and buying them. It started to go very, very well. And then I heard that BAT were going to launch a competitor product in the new super premium category that we created. And I was very nervous because this is BAT. And then they launched their product, and I was delighted. They called it Equinox. It was beautiful. It was blue, very similar shaped packaging. Then they launched their product at £18.95 a packet, which is truly mad. I mean, who's going to buy the world's second most expensive brand of cigarette? You know, they should have gone for 23 quid. I'd have had to go to 25 quid. They missed the point. This is a market position. It is not a product. So I now want to say, after all of this, and when I set up my agency, of course, I was a poacher turned gamekeeper. The major tobacco companies came to ask me to work with them and help redefine their brands. So I want to share with you a case because for two reasons. One, it exemplifies a very important story, which I'm going to come back to and touch on later. A brand is not a logo. A brand is not a name. A brand is not a series of Pantone colors or rules. A brand is a promise. A brand is an idea. And I'm a great believer that people are interested in ideas and loyal to promises, not products or price points. So this is a case of nothing ventured, nothing gained. I went to see this tobacco company who paid me £500,000, and I don't care who you are, that is a shed load of cash, in order to redesign their packaging because they thought branding was about pack design. And I looked at it and I went through the market, and the problem that they had was they hadn't done anything. This taught me another lesson. Consumers will forgive you if you try something and fail. Entropy is unacceptable. Doing nothing is not an issue. It's just, no one will forgive you for that. You have to try. So the problem was there was no energy in their brand. There was nothing there. They were so boring, they couldn't get arrested if they tried. So the answer was, get arrested. So in this marketplace where they were, there's no advertising, there's no way of promoting your product, there's no way of getting out there because of all the rules around tobacco, all the legislation around tobacco. But my idea was this: no one can stop you advertising nothing. Okay, very simple idea. So I went to them and I said, in a world where everyone is screaming, he who speaks loudest, he who says nothing, speaks loudest of all. Incidentally, I made this quote up, okay, and then I attributed it to Anonymous, because then it looks quite profound, you know, it looks credible, you know, and I've noticed a really good idea is always attribute your ideas to someone else, because then they start to carry weight. So, and I remember when I was pitching this, and I had this slide up, yes, I've seen this slide before, Mr. Cunningham, yeah, of course you have, mate, you know. So what I'm saying here is this: in the world of marketing, everyone is screaming for our attention. Everybody's trying to get through the real bottleneck in the market, which is the eyes and the ears of the customer. And to get through the eyes and the ears, you have to have either a relevant, compelling, interesting idea that people want to take on, or a shed load of cash, so you can just carpet bomb people's consciousness. So I said this: in a world where everyone is screaming, he who says nothing speaks loudest of all, I said, go out and buy 75% of all of the outdoor media in your country and advertise just nothing. Okay? And then, you know when you're doing a design presentation to a company, there's a point where you walk up to show the new pack design, £500,000, okay? This was the pack design, okay, with absolutely nothing. They were sort of scratching their heads. And I said, and then at the point of sale, you can have nothing sold here, you know, nothing is addictive, nothing can kill you. And then they pulled in their lawyers, and I thought, oh God, here we go again, you know. And the lawyers came back with this argument: if inherent in your advertising of nothing is the intention to sell something, then you are not advertising nothing, you are advertising the thing you're intending to sell. And I said, God, that's brilliant. What we do is we run the campaign, we then slip to the anti-smoking lobby the fact that a tobacco company is trying to cynically exploit the law by advertising nothing. They can't help themselves, they'll go bananas. We then say, I'm sorry, advertising nothing's upset you so much, we're going to pull the campaign. You let them pull the campaign and let the PR do everything. Because basically, the world of branding is the world of bonfires. What we are doing as businesses is creating virtual bonfires and putting logs, debates, ideas on those bonfires to make them burn brightly. And the brighter they burn and the more contentious they are, the more people will have an opinion about them, the more people will look at them. So we are just bonfire keepers. We are trying to create beacons to attract people to our ideas. Whether they like them or don't like them is immaterial. What matters is that they're taking an interest in them. So we went out and we went back, and incidentally, through my whole presentation, this was the slide that I was doing very deliberately. I think there's something wrong with your presentation. No, bear with me, we'll get there. And when you're buying 75% of all outdoor media, you have to put down a 30% deposit. They put down a $5 million deposit in order to buy the media. They paid me the $500,000. And then 3 days before the campaign was due to launch, the CEO called me and said, sorry, Mr. Cunningham, we're not going to be running this campaign. I said, that's crazy. Why spend half a million quid with me and 5 million on the deposit if you're not going to run it? And this was his answer. And I kid you not, this was his answer. Because had we not paid you and paid the deposit and showed every intention of going forward, our lawyers advised us that you would have been able to take this idea and sell it to our competitors, and they would have done it. Which is the maddest thing. It's the best example I've ever heard of corporate fear. Okay, now, I believe the biggest threat to everybody in this room in business, actually in our personal lives, in terms of everything, is fear. Fear is the enemy. And there are two kinds of fear. There's tiger coming, better run. That's quite useful. There's another kind of fear, which is rabbit frozen in headlights. Not so useful. So I say, take fear and use it positively. And remember, fear is the absence of love, just as love is the absence of fear. So be in love is the answer to all of these stories. And in terms of all of this, now some reminders for you. We are living in an affluent society. We are living in a society where there are many products, shops, services, messages, communications. It's so confusing for everybody. And in all of that, how do we as businesses let our voice be heard in that space? Because we're not just competing with other people in our business. In the mind of the customer, everyone is talking to them at the same time. So how do we compete amongst all of that noise in all of those brands? And the answer is, remember that the scarce resource in the market is mind space. And becoming synonymous with something, creating a relationship, owning a position in the mind of the customer is what this is all about, is what branding is all about. So the mind can be seen as a brandographic mosaic. We all know about demographics, we know about psychographics. Think about it in terms of brandographics. We have our favorite watch brand, our favorite TV, our favorite car, our favorite brands. And those brands define us. And in that, there is a high value position amongst those defining brands. But of course, there's also the generics, which we just buy, toilet paper. It doesn't particularly define you. It's a thing that you have to get. Washing machine tablets, whatever they might be. So some things are generic, other things define us. As businesses, we need to ask ourselves, are we trading in the generic area? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with trading. But is that what we're doing, trading? Or are we building a value position in the minds of our customers? And if you're building a value position in the mind of your customer, you are working in the world of brand. And the criteria for success in that is something with an unmistakable position that can be multiplied a number of times through many different debates, ideas, and products, and communicated globally. Those are the criteria necessary to create a brand. And essentially, it revolves around this idea of the big picture. I just want to say, to bring marketing down to just the simplest level, the facts matter, your service matters, your product offering matters, your price point matters, your 4 Ps matter, they all matter. But what matters most is what customers believe of us to be true. Perception is everything. There is no singular truth. The truth resides in faith. What we believe to be true is true for us. It's not necessarily true for everybody else. In fact, a little more respect for each other's truth, this world would be a better, healthier, less dangerous place. The truth resides in faith. Belief is everything. And I think a really great example of branding, of marketing, because again I say, none of this is new, is this, 2,000 years old. Here is a story. Angel impregnates a virgin who gives birth to the Son of God, who grows up to die on a cross to save us from our sins, then rises from the dead to sit at the right hand of God the Father in heaven and will come again in glory to judge us all. Now, in my opinion, that's a long shot. Okay, that is a big ask. If that was a business plan, I wouldn't invest. You know, that's a big, big story. But I would be wrong not to invest. Because 30% of the world's population would lay down their life and die for that belief. And there's a great example of branding. Great logo. You know, they've got retail outlets all over the world. They've got a book. Very important. If you want something to believe it, put it in a hardback book, buy it yourself, you know, give it away. It's fantastic ideas. And I'm a great believer. Jesus was an ad man. When he talked about walking on water, I don't think he physically hung about on a lake kicking a football about. I think he was saying, if you're of love, you're so light, it's as if you were walking on water, feeding the 5,000. I don't think he took 5 fish and 5 loaves and fed 5,000 people. I think he was saying, love is indivisible. You can never run out of it. It's as if you had 5 loaves and 5 fish and you could feed 5,000 people. But of course, they didn't have advertising then. There were stories. So these things they gained their own traction. But this is about love. The love story is the most important story that there is. And in terms of business, in terms of brand, there are only 2 questions you need to answer. Those 2 questions are this. What is your point and why should I care? Okay, if you can answer those questions, you've got me. You've got my attention. You're into my mind. What's your point? What's your direction? What's your strategic intention? What's your sponsoring thought? And why should I care? What's the emotional relevance for me as the consumer? And incidentally, the answer to those 2 questions should be the same both internally within your organization as well as externally in the minds of your consumers. Because if it's different internally to externally, then white men speak with forked tongue. And I just want to say this. I'm not too bothered about lying. You know, I don't think it's not a moral problem. It's just really expensive when it comes to business because you've got to keep going over and over and remember the lie. You know, I've done a lot of therapy. I recommend here therapy to everybody. If you don't think you've got any problems, go and see a therapist. You know, you will soon find you've got loads of problems. And what I've learned through that is our problems are the things that allow us to improve. You know, the problems are the way forward. So in terms of this, in terms of branding, there is a simple principle that I want you to hold in your mind if you can. And that principle is this. We are all one. Honor the difference between you and your customer, not the separation. Remove the illusion of separation from your thinking and from your branding and from your organization. You are your customer. And therefore, treat your customer as you would have your customer treat you. And there is only one way in which you would want to be treated, and that is in love. And as I say, a brand is not a logo, it's not a name, it's a promise. So what I'm going to say is this. Companies are like people. After all, companies are made up of people. And in terms of people, there are 3 perspectives to any individual. There's how you see yourself, how others see you, and how you want to be seen. If how you see yourself is exactly how others see you and it's exactly how you want to be seen, then you are the Dalai Lama. You know, you are the Christ. You're walking along and birds land on your shoulders and squirrels follow you and feed you nuts. You know, it's a miracle. If you find someone like that, you marry them or follow them. Okay, very simple. If, however, how you see yourself is absolutely not how others see and it's not how you want to be seen, then you desperately need therapy. You know, because you're unhappy, no one gets you, etc. This is exactly the same for companies. So how you want to be seen as a company is your vision. How others see you is your external market position, and how you see yourself is your internal culture. And what I say is this: first of all, define your thought, because good branding, like good business, is based upon one simple principle that's 5,000 years old: right thought, right word, right action. Know what it is you're trying to say it clearly, and then do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it. If you can live by that rule, you will have a happy, successful life. And of course, that's the most difficult rule of all. So the first thing, as a process, define your direction, your thought. What is the highest expression of who you really are or choose to be? What are the principles that underlie your business practice? Write them down. What's your point, and why should I care? Define it. Then say what is so in terms of your internal culture and your product portfolio. Remember, your product is only a manifestation of your idea. If your idea changes, your product portfolio needs to change too. And the rule there is say what is so, don't pretend. Next, in terms of action, one rule. Do what works that serves the vision you have of who you really want to be, the highest expression of who you really are. And all of this is driven by a motive. Why? Ask yourself, why do you get up in the morning? What makes you so special? What is it about you that can't be copied tomorrow by somebody else? And the answer there is you. You are the only thing that can't be copied by somebody else. It's the values and attitudes that you hold true, and they are the glue that holds your organizational structure together. And in terms of values and attitudes, I'm not talking about the things that are generic. Transparency, honesty, responsibility. I'm talking about the things that make you uniquely who you are. And then right at the heart of it is your promise, your brand, your concept, your soul. So branding in business is a process of consciously evolving to be the highest expression of who you really are. By looking at our brands, we ought to be able to think of them as a crystal ball which shows us where we want to be going forward. So all of this basically says turn your business inside out. Clarify your thought, say what is so, and then do what works to create an unmistakable promise that unleashes the passion of your teams, giving them something to take pride in, and then make that thing they're taking pride in the thing that you sell, not your product. People are interested in your ideas, not your product. So Harley-Davidson, for example, are not selling motorbikes. When someone puts Harley-Davidson on their arm and tattoos it in there, they're not saying, I am a motorbike. They're saying, I believe in freedom. Harley-Davidson sell freedom. In terms of Nike, Nike's attitude is, you don't win silver, you lose gold. Nike are selling and owning winning in the minds of consumers. Body Shop are selling caring and ethical business practice. If you don't believe in animals, experimenting on animals, and you don't believe in screwing the third world in terms of your trading practice, then you will pay £3.20 for a bar of soap as opposed to 65p down at Boots. Okay, so these are the ideas. They're value added. And incidentally, branding is not about awareness. It doesn't matter if my grandmother's heard of Nike. She's never going to buy a pair of trainers. Okay, branding is about involvement. It's about getting inside and creating a relationship. So, how do you achieve an unmistakable position? How do you transform the organization? First of all, create a value proposition that people can believe in and buy into. Really define your organization as who you really are. And then create an unmistakable brand and give. As a company, give the market something unique. As a leader in your company, give your employees a direction to believe in. And as an employee, give something of yourself. Remember, what's your point and why should I care? And the really important answer is the highest expression of who you really are or choose to be, and embody that in your brand. And that means love. It means love what you do, love where you do it, love who you do it with, and most importantly, love who you do it for, your customer. And if you don't love it, try harder. And if you still don't love it after trying harder, then try and change it so that you do love it. And if you still don't love it after trying harder and trying to change it, then leave, and do something else. It's our responsibility. We are the authors of our own creation. We are the producer, we are the director, we are the writer, we are the lead actor in our own movie. So if you see shit, it's your shit. If you see beauty, it's your beauty. But it's our story. Take responsibility and love your customer. Create a relationship with your customer. Thank your customer, because by thanking your customer, you're helping your customer to thank you. And if you're helping your customer to thank you, you are using your customer. And if you're using your customer, you are embracing your customer. And if you're embracing your customer, you're loving your customer. And if you're loving your customer, you're trusting your customer. And if you're trusting your customer, you are knowing and understanding your customer. And that process is perfectly symmetrical. So it's about love. And the key reminder that I want to leave you with is be who you really are. And the final message that I want to confirm with you is this: there is indeed life after death. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing, BJ. We got about 10 minutes for questions. Who would like to ask BJ a question?
I'm often asked if Death cigarettes are still going, and I'm pleased to say they are. They're selling in Japan, South Africa, the Bahamas, and a nightclub in Manchester. So, eclectically. Yes? I work as a consultant for major corporations. So what I do is go in as an individual at a senior level on the board and help look at the problems, the issues that these companies have. I'll give you an example. At the moment, I'm working with McDonald's globally. And 2 years ago, I was at a conference in Indonesia talking to their senior executive. And afterwards, the guy said, Mr. Cunningham, thank you for that speech. You know, you talked about problems being opportunities. What do you think is the opportunity for McDonald's? And I said, well, you know, your brand is the problem. And he was very surprised because McDonald's are the leader globally in terms of every indices on brand, so they're very proud of their brand position. And I said, well, the problem is that you're measuring all the wrong things. It's not about awareness, it's about what your promise means. And in the mind of your customer, McDonald's means bad fast food. And what it should mean is good food fast. And that was a very simple, and I didn't get a huge round of applause, you know, as I left the stage. But then 2 years later, the CEO, who's incidentally called Ronald, called me and said, you know, we've done our research across 117 territories, spent $4.8 million, and it turns out that McDonald's means bad fast food, and the answer is it could mean good food fast. And would you like to become part of our team to strategically shift McDonald's in terms of its brand position? I said, yes, I'd be very interested, but you've got to understand, in order to be good food fast, you actually have to be good food fast. You can't just say it. You know, so it's about doing first, then saying it. That's the kind of work that I do. So, and I love that work. I adore it. I'm also working with Microsoft, big organizations. And it's quite nice because I don't have a, the problem with agencies is, an agency, and I ran an agency, you've got an overhead that you have to cover, which basically means when a client asks you for your opinion, you've kind of got to temper your opinion and not lose the client, you know, because otherwise you're not going to be covering your overhead. So agencies tend to give the safest answer as opposed to maybe the right answer. And the advantage of being independent is that I can give whatever answer I choose. So that's the work I'm doing now. Branding, basically, and I love it because what branding is corporate therapy. That's what it is. It's essentially getting to the heart, getting to the soul of an organization, and hopefully improving them. Thank you. Any other questions? Yep.
What brands do you really admire today?
I love Harley Davidson. You know, I've got a Harley. I've got a 1947 Knucklehead. I've got a great story about my Knucklehead. I'll share it with you really quick. But just before I tell that story, I love Harley Davidson because they so are who they say they are, and I really buy that concept. Because there you've got an excellent example of branding. That is a product which doesn't start, doesn't stop, leaks oil. You know, it's crap. And I remember I took my Harley to the bike shop and I said, this is leaking oil, and the guy said, that's not leaking oil, it's marking its spot. You know, and I love that. You know, I love that. I love it. So, and I'll just quickly share with you this story about my Harley. I've got a 1947 Knucklehead. I bought it in Phoenix 20 years ago. 15 years ago, I had a motorcycle crash on a Ducati, and I severed all the nerves to my left arm. So I may look incredibly casual here with my arm in my pocket, you know, but in fact, it's because I can't move it. And while I was in hospital on morphine, I gave my bike to a Hell's Angel down in Croydon to repair, and which is never a good move. And when I came out of Pink World and called him and said, you know, what's happening, there was just no answer. And then I called the next week, no answer, no answer, no answer. The next month, no answer. And then I put it in my diary as a recurring entry on the 14th of February every year to call Mick, Valentine's Day. And I did, every year for 15 years with no answer. And then last year in May, I got a call, hello, BJ, it's Mick. And I said, God, Mick, how are you? You know, and he said, well, I'm well. And I said, well, where have you been? He said, I've been away. Well, where? You know, Canada or Australia? He said, no, I've been inside, you know, and he'd basically been in prison for 15 years, you know. And then he got out of prison and he called me to say, do you want to finish the project? I mean, you know, how fantastic is that? It's a Lazarus of a bike, you know, it's back from the dead. So I love Harley Davidson. I think they're a great brand, and also a very clear example of branding, because quite clearly it's not about the product, it's all about the idea. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is a really impressive pitch about the ability to sell to those that are corporately powerful, corporately wealthy, on behalf of those with the power to consume. Have you got anecdotes or experience about working with those who aren't corporately wealthy and who would be trying to sell the power to not consume?
I worked with the Prince's Trust, which is a charity. In fact, I would argue they are an enormously powerful corporate. Okay, so in a way, but you take my point, it's just a different story. And what they were looking at was, how they could create evergreen funding campaigns that would work. And the simple idea that I pitched them was this idea of Roundup. This was 12 years ago, where basically you go into a shop, your bill comes to £16.95. Would you like to round up? The extra money gets rounded up and gets sent off to charity. Okay, so it's a very, very simple idea, and it worked very powerfully for them. And my view is, all of these ideas that are being employed by large corporates are being employed because they work. As a small entrepreneur, as a businessman, as a small business here in this room, I think it's a good idea to learn from the people who really have made it work, seen how it works, and refined their processes. Just like if you are trying to take wisdom, it's worth finding a guru. If you are trying to learn something, it's worth getting a book. If you're in business, it's worth looking at companies that have been very successful in order to study how they've become successful. Because the principles behind these ideas in terms of branding are exactly the same for a small organization as for a big organization. They're just more difficult to communicate as a big organization. Take McDonald's, 1.6 million employees. They've got to communicate an idea through before they can take it to the consumer market. So I'd say these ideas are exactly appropriate. It's a question of how you can turbocharge them in your own business. As above, so below. That's my view. Is that useful? Is that the question you were asking?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's just changing the culture of what you're trying to say.
Precisely right. Precisely right. In the sense of a sole trader, the answer is be who you really are. Be proud of who you are. Go out there and be yourself and give your promise to the market. And then all of those circles are essentially not about a corporation. They're about you. What are your values? What is your product? What is your service offering? What is your vision? But articulating that is a very good idea, because it gives you then you're actually writing down the DNA, if you like, the cultural DNA of your business. And I believe it's the people that people buy into as opposed to the products. That's just a fundamental belief I hold true. Any other questions?
Got time for one more, BJ.
One more question? Sir.
Quite often, marketing people's ideas don't take off in the business because the people in the business don't get behind it or don't buy into it. But what's kind of the best way you've seen to making that not happen and making the idea happen in the business?
It's a great question, and the answer is reverse resistance from within. So rather than taking an idea, going out and then rather than telling people that this is what's happening, embrace them and elicit from them and share with them in the creation of the idea so that they own it before you ever go out with it. So I say use the people that you've got within your organization, and before you ever launch a campaign or a concept externally, work it with your people internally. Because if they're cynical about it, for absolute sure, everybody else is going to be cynical, and rightly so. Yeah, quite right, quite right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.